Have you ever noticed how the person who does the most for a family is usually the one they value the least? It is one of the most painful truths of human nature. In every toxic family dynamic, there is a role for everyone. There is the hero, the enabler, the golden child, and then there is the scapegoat. If you are listening to this and you have spent your life being the one who cleans up the messes, the one who stays quiet while others scream, the one who pays the bills while others play, then you know exactly what I am talking about. They demand everything from you, but they value nothing about you. They treat your kindness like a weakness and your sacrifice like a duty. But what they forget is that even the most patient person has a breaking point. And when the person who has been holding the foundation together finally lets go, the whole house comes crashing down. My name is Sarah, and for 32 years, I was the invisible pillar of the Miller family. I grew up in a house where the air was always thick with a strange kind of selective sight. My parents, Robert and Diane, were experts at looking right through me to see my older brother, Marcus. Marcus was the sun, and we were all expected to orbit around him, regardless of how much he burned us. He was the golden child. He was charming, he was handsome, and he was absolutely, fundamentally useless. From the time we were kids, Marcus could do no wrong. If he broke a window, I must have been the one who distracted him. If he failed a test, the teacher was biased. If he got into trouble with the law as a teenager, it was because he fell in with the wrong crowd. My parents spent their lives bailing him out, both emotionally and financially. I, on the other hand, was the burden. I was the one who worked 2 jobs through college because my parents had spent my tuition fund on a lawyer for Marcus after his 3rd DUI. I was the one who showed up for every holiday, every birthday, and every minor crisis, only to be told that I was too sensitive or that I needed to be more like Marcus, who was always just about to make it big. They didn't see the long hours I put into my career as a senior analyst. They didn't see the discipline it took to build a life from nothing while they were busy throwing their savings into the bottomless pit of Marcus's latest business schemes. 10 years ago, the house of cards finally collapsed. Marcus had convinced my parents to co-sign on a massive personal loan for a luxury car dealership that never even opened. He took the money, lived like a king for 6 months, and then filed for bankruptcy, leaving my parents with a mountain of debt they couldn't pay. They were in their 60s, looking at foreclosure. They were going to lose the family home, the only place I had ever known. They were terrified, weeping at the kitchen table, while Marcus was nowhere to be found. He had moved 3 states away to start over with a new girlfriend, leaving the wreckage behind. I couldn't watch them lose everything. Despite how they treated me, they were still my parents. But I wasn't a fool. I knew that if I just gave them the money, they would somehow find a way to give it to Marcus. So I did something bold. I had been saving every penny I earned, living in a tiny studio apartment and eating ramen. I used that money to form an anonymous, limited liability company called Stonegate Holdings. Through a series of complex legal maneuvers and a very good lawyer, I bought the house directly from the bank before it hit the auction block. I paid off the arrears and took over the mortgage. My parents had no idea. They were told that a private investment firm had purchased the property and agreed to let them stay as long-term tenants for a very low, subsidized rent. I told them I had pulled some strings with a client at work to make it happen. For a decade, I was their landlord in secret. I paid the property taxes, I paid for the new roof, I paid for the furnace when it died in the middle of January, and because I couldn't afford my own place and the mortgage on their house, I moved into the basement annex. It was a dark, cramped space with low ceilings and a separate entrance, but I renovated it with my own 2 hands. I turned it into a sanctuary. Meanwhile, my parents lived upstairs in the spacious 4-bedroom house I was paying for. And how did they treat me? They treated me like a squatter. They told me every day how lucky I was that they let me live there. They made me pay them rent, money that I quietly put back into the mortgage account they didn't know existed. They belittled my career, called me a basement dweller, and constantly reminded me that when Marcus came back, I would have to find somewhere else to go because he deserved the space. The breaking point arrived 6 months ago. Marcus came back, but he didn't come alone. He arrived with Tiffany, a woman who looked like she had never spent a day in a room without a mirror. Tiffany was demanding, snobby, and immediately decided that our family home was the perfect place for them to live while Marcus figured out his next move. They didn't want a guest room, though. Tiffany took one look at my renovated basement annex with its modern kitchenette and private entrance and decided she wanted it. She told my parents that she couldn't possibly share a bathroom with them upstairs, and that the basement was the only way she and Marcus could have the privacy they deserved as a high-profile couple. The cruelty escalated almost instantly. At dinner, my mother would sigh and talk about how crowded the house felt. My father would pointedly ask when I was going to move out and find a husband, so I wouldn't be such a weight on their shoulders. They started demanding more rent from me, claiming that the cost of living had gone up. But I knew the money was going straight into Tiffany's shopping trips and Marcus's expensive dinners. They would sit upstairs, laughing and drinking wine, while I sat in my quiet basement, listening to the floorboards creak under the weight of their entitlement. Then came the night of the final dinner. It was a Tuesday. My mother had made a big roast, Marcus's favorite. Tiffany was wearing a ring that looked like it cost more than my parents' car, though I suspected it was fake. The atmosphere was thick with a smug, oily satisfaction. I sat there, picking at my food, while they talked about the wedding. They were planning a destination ceremony in Hawaii. They were talking about the thousands of dollars they needed for the deposit. Robert, my father, cleared his throat and set his fork down. He looked at me with a coldness that still haunts me. He said, "Sarah, we've made a decision. Family has to come first. Marcus and Tiffany are starting a life together. They need their own space, and this basement is the only logical solution. You've had a good run here, but it's time for you to be an adult and move on." We've had a legal document prepared. He slid a white envelope across the table. I didn't open it. I knew what it was. It was a formal 30-day eviction notice. My mother wouldn't even look at me. She just kept nodding, her lips pressed into a thin line of feigned regret. Marcus was grinning, leaning back in his chair like a king on a throne. Tiffany was checking her nails, looking bored. My father continued, "You're a failure, Sarah. You're 32 and you're still living in your parents' basement. It's embarrassing. We're doing this for your own good. You need to go out there and actually make something of yourself instead of hiding down here like a hermit. You have 30 days to clear your junk out." The room went very still. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I could hear the wind rattling the window pane. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was a terrifying, icy calm. It was the feeling of 10 years of loyalty, 10 years of sacrifice, and 10 years of love finally freezing solid and shattering into a million pieces. I looked at the envelope. I looked at Marcus, who was laughing under his breath. I looked at my parents, who were looking at me like I was a piece of trash they were finally throwing away. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just pushed the envelope back toward the center of the table. I stood up, smoothed out my skirt, and looked my father right in the eye. "I'm not leaving," I said. My voice was steady, almost conversational. My father's face turned a bright, angry purple. "Excuse me? You don't have a choice. This is our house. We are your parents, and we are telling you to get out. You're a guest here, Sarah, and your invitation has been revoked." I didn't answer him. I just turned around and walked away. I walked down the stairs to my basement, locked the door, and for the first time in a decade, I slept like a baby. The next 30 days were a gauntlet of psychological warfare. They cut off the internet to the basement. They would stomp on the floorboards at 3 a.m. to wake me up. They left bags of trash outside my door. Marcus would stand in the driveway and mock me when I left for work, telling me he couldn't wait to turn my bedroom into his personal gym. Tiffany started ordering furniture for the basement, having it delivered to the front porch as a way to taunt me. I ignored all of it. I went to work, I did my job, and I spoke to my lawyer every single day. I made sure every T was crossed and every I was dotted. Moving day arrived on a Saturday. It was a beautiful, sunny morning. I saw the moving truck pull into the driveway from my window. Marcus and his friends were there, ready to haul my belongings out onto the lawn. My parents were standing on the front porch like a welcoming committee. I stayed in my basement, sitting on my sofa with a folder in my lap. The banging on my door started at exactly 10 o'clock. It wasn't a knock. It was a violent, rhythmic thudding. "Sarah!" My father's voice was a roar. "Get out here now! The police are on their way! We told you we weren't joking!" I didn't move. A few minutes later, I heard the sirens. 2 police cruisers pulled up to the curb. I watched through the blinds as my parents ran down the front steps, waving their arms. They were playing the role of their lives. My mother was clutching her chest, pretending to be faint. My father was pointing at the basement door, shouting about a hostile trespasser, a daughter who had lost her mind and refused to leave their home. He told the officers that I was dangerous, that I was squatting, and that they were afraid for their safety. I heard the heavy boots of the officers on the stairs. I heard the jingle of their belts. There was a firm, professional knock on my door. "This is the police. Open the door." I stood up, took a deep breath, and opened the door. There were 2 officers there, one older with a weary face and one younger who looked uncomfortable. Behind them, my parents, Marcus, and Tiffany were huddled together, their faces twisted with a mix of anticipation and malice. "Officer," my father shouted, "that's her. Get her out of there. Drag her out if you have to." The older officer looked at me. "Ma'am, your parents have provided us with the deed to this house in their names from 20 years ago. They've issued a legal eviction notice that has expired. You need to gather your things and leave the premises immediately, or we will have to arrest you for trespassing." I looked at the officer. I didn't look at my family. I handed him the folder. "Officer," I said quietly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Please look at these documents." The officer took the folder with a skeptical look. My father started laughing. "What is that, a fake lease? You're delusional, Sarah. Give it up." The officer opened the folder. He started reading. His eyes moved quickly at first, then slowed down. He flipped to the second page, then the third. He looked at the corporate seal of Stonegate Holdings, LLC. He looked at the purchase agreement from 10 years ago. He looked at the current property tax records and the deed of trust. He looked at the document that listed me, Sarah Miller, as the sole owner and registered agent of the LLC that owned the property. He looked up at my father. His expression had changed from weary to stone cold. "Sir," he said, "where did you get the idea that you own this house?" My father stammered, "What? We've lived here for 30 years. We bought it in 94. The officer shook his head. "According to the county records and these certified documents, this house was sold in a private sale 10 years ago to Stonegate Holdings. Your names haven't been on this title for a decade." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a world ending. My mother's hand went to her mouth. Marcus's smug grin vanished, replaced by a look of sheer confusion. Tiffany looked back and forth between us, like she was trying to calculate the value of a house that was suddenly slipping through her fingers. The officer turned back to me. "Ms. Miller, you are the owner of this property?" "I am," I said. "I bought it to save them from foreclosure when my brother's debts nearly destroyed them. I've let them stay here out of the goodness of my heart, but I have been the one paying the mortgage, the taxes, and the insurance for 10 years. They aren't my landlords. They are my tenants." The younger officer looked at my father. "Sir, you called us here to report a trespasser, but based on this, the only person who has a right to be here is your daughter. You've been living in her house." My father's face went from purple to a ghostly, sickly white. He looked like he was about to collapse. "Robert?" my mother whispered. "Robert, what is he saying?" I stepped out of the basement and stood on the small landing, looking up at them. I had spent my whole life looking up at them, feeling small, feeling like I was the one who was lucky to be allowed in their presence. But now, for the first time, I felt tall. You wanted to talk about family coming first, I said. My voice was cold, cutting through the air like a knife. You wanted to talk about who is a failure and who is a burden. For 10 years, I have carried you. I have worked myself to the bone to make sure you had a roof over your heads while you treated me like dirt. I saved this house. I saved your reputation. And how did you thank me? You tried to throw me out on the street to make room for the person who caused your ruin in the first place. Marcus took a step forward, his voice cracking. Sarah, come on, we didn't know. If we had known, we wouldn't have... You wouldn't have what? I interrupted. You wouldn't have been so cruel? You wouldn't have mocked me? No, Marcus, you would have just found a different way to bleed me dry. You're a parasite. You always have been. And Mom, Dad, you're the ones who fed him. I turned to the officer. Officer, since they were so kind as to have the paperwork ready, I have something of my own. I pulled 3 envelopes from the back of the folder. I handed one to my father, one to my mother, and one to Marcus. These are 30-day notices to quit, I said. You wanted me out in 30 days. Now, the roles are reversed. You have 30 days to find a new place to live. And because I am the owner, and because you have created a hostile living environment, I will be filing for an immediate restraining order that prevents Marcus and Tiffany from entering this property ever again. They can leave now. The scene that followed was pure chaos. Tiffany started screaming at Marcus, calling him a loser and a liar. She realized there was no free house, no basement sanctuary, and no money to be had. She stormed off to her car and drove away, leaving Marcus standing in the driveway with his boxes and his broken dreams. My mother started wailing, begging me to reconsider, telling me that they were old and had nowhere to go. My father just stood there, staring at the eviction notice in his hand like it was a death warrant. The police officers stayed until Marcus and Tiffany had cleared their things out. They escorted them off the property. I watched from the porch as my brother, the golden child, walked down the driveway with nothing but a suitcase and a look of utter defeat. The next 30 days were quiet. There was no more stomping on the floorboards. There was no more laughter from upstairs. My parents tried to talk to me, to apologize, to explain that they had just been stressed. They tried to play the family card one last time. But every time they spoke, I remembered the look on my father's face when he handed me that envelope at dinner. I remembered the way my mother looked away when I was being insulted. I remembered that for 10 years, they didn't love me. They just used me. They moved out on a rainy Tuesday. They didn't have enough money for a nice place, especially since Marcus had already spent their savings on Tiffany's ring and the wedding deposits. They ended up in a tiny, 1-bedroom apartment in a part of town they used to look down on. It was cheap, it was cramped, and it was exactly what they could afford on their Social Security. Marcus didn't go with them. As soon as the money dried up, he disappeared again, moving in with some other unsuspecting person he could manipulate. Once the house was empty, the silence was beautiful. I spent the next few months renovating the upstairs. I knocked down the wall that separated the kitchen from the living room, letting in the light. I repainted every room in bright, airy colors. I threw away the old, heavy furniture that smelled of bitterness and secrets. I bought a big, comfortable bed and put it in the master bedroom, the room my parents had lived in for 30 years. I also got a dog, a big, goofy golden retriever named Cooper. He doesn't care about my career or how much money I have. He just likes to sit at my feet while I drink my coffee on the porch in the mornings. I haven't spoken to my parents or Marcus since the day they moved out. They've sent letters, of course, letters filled with guilt trips and demands for money. I don't read them. I don't need to. I spent 32 years reading the room, reading their moods, and reading their needs. I'm done reading. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty. They ask how I could do that to my own flesh and blood. And I tell them the same thing every time. Family isn't just a matter of DNA. Family is a matter of respect, of loyalty, and of love. If you treat someone like an enemy, you can't be surprised when they stop acting like a friend. I didn't evict my parents because I was mean. I evicted them because I finally realized that I deserved to live in a house where I was valued. Standing up to a toxic family is the hardest thing you will ever do. They know your triggers, they know your weaknesses, they know exactly how to make you feel like the villain in your own story. But there is a power in the truth that no lie can ever defeat. When you finally stop playing the role they assigned to you, you realize that the stage they built was made of paper. Karma isn't always a lightning bolt from the sky. Sometimes, karma is just the person who has been holding everything together finally deciding to let go. It's the moment when the hidden sacrifices are brought into the light, and the people who took them for granted are forced to face the reality of their own making. I am no longer the invisible pillar. I am the owner of my life, the owner of my home, and the owner of my peace. And let me tell you, the view from the top floor is much better than it ever was from the basement. If you are struggling today, if you are being treated like the scapegoat, just remember, you hold more power than they want you to know. You are the one keeping the roof up, and you have every right to decide who gets to live under it. Be brave, be firm, and never, ever be afraid to hand back the envelope they tried to give you. Because in the end, the only person you truly owe anything to is yourself.